Hi, good evening, everyone. On the occasion of the National Tourism Day, we are doing a short segment on coastal tourism. To discuss this, we are joined by Stella James and Nayana Udyashankar from Equations, a Bangalore-based organization working on research, advocacy, and campaign on equitable tourism. Welcome, Stella and Nayana.
Hi, thanks,
Thank
Anita.
you.
Hi. To start with, let me ask you something that I have always been curious about. So, how is it like working on research related to tourism? I'm imagining that you guys must be getting to travel to a lot of new places and meeting a lot of amazing people. What would you say are the highlights of doing this research?
I think for me, it's I came in not knowing much about tourism, so I also thought of this as a great way to know about different places. But after a little while of being at Equations and learning a little bit more about tourism, I think I really got to see what happens to a place before you come and after you leave. You'll really see the inner workings of how tourism is working, who is making it work. And it's not as simple as, it's not merely just, I mean, for tourists, it's a holiday, and it's a great thing that it's a holiday. It's so many new experiences, etc. But it's also someone else's home. And how does tourism begin in such a place? What goes into it? There is, for example, in Mahabaleshwar, everyone knows there's a lot of strawberry tourism, but how did it really start? What are the forces behind it? What are the policies that has shaped the kind of tourism that exists today? What are the corporate interests that have shaped all of it? So all of those things, I got really interested, and that's been about for me working on tourism. And also the people who shape the tourism, the guides, the street vendors, the homestay owners, the hotel workers, the hotels themselves, the bigger industries, all of them, what do they think and feel about what is for them a business interest, and how they shape this whole industry itself. So I think for me, I get to work on all of that. Maybe Stella can add her experience.
Yeah, for me, definitely the traveling. Like, I have to say that being able to really like go to all these places and see, like Nana was saying, all the inner workings is really amazing. And I think also for me, like with Nana, when I first came in, I don't think I'd ever thought about travel and tourism as an industry, or even like my own traveling as a person at an individual level. And I think so that has really changed for me to really like be able to think of tourism as a sector, as an industry that has a certain way of functioning, and there are all these different models, and there's so much that goes into it. And I think also, honestly, for me, I have like, I know a lot of people talk about like the transformational power of tourism and travel and all of that, which was a narrative that I never really like bought into earlier. But like coming in here, I see how even for a lot of host communities, I see how much sort of faith they have in tourism. Like even where people have seen the impacts of tourism, there's still a lot of sort of faith to say, we want other people to come in and see how we live our lives. We want people to have that experience. So it's been really amazing for me to see how positively people like often view tourism. Not that there aren't issues, but there's so much like people really like traveling. Like a lot of people really like traveling, and I think a lot of people like other people like coming into their spaces and seeing how they live, and that's just like really nice to watch, I think, from like close up. So for me, that definitely.
Yeah, very interesting perspectives. And yeah, that takes me to my second question. So, I mean, ecotourism is something that is promoted as an alternative to the mainstream tourism, which can lead to a lot of waste generation and damage to local ecosystems and communities. So, how would you look at the ecotourism? I mean, like that models that are currently present among the coastal tourism sector in India. Would you say that they contribute to community development and ecosystem conservation?
I think so. I mean, I have to say a lot of ecotourism is used as a label. So we'll really have to find out which of these places are doing what the components of ecotourism are, which is essentially that conservation is a component, and that education of visitors of nature and the environment is one component, and a very important component is community involvement. There are, I mean, even as I say these words, you can imagine that community involvement can mean like, I'm giving one job to someone, or I am letting the communities take responsibility and ownership. It can of the tourism itself and plan and decide what they want and what they don't want. So it can rate, has a whole range of it. So the same thing for of conservation being one of the components as well. So I think one of the I think what we struggle with is usually tourism is seen as always a clean industry, and it's only tourism. There is no pollution. There is no blah blah blah. There's no land acquisition. I don't think that's true at all. And we really have to question the kind of impacts that tourism itself brings in. It's not that it's not possible to make it sustainable and equitable and democratic and all of these terms that we use, but we really have to question how we are doing this. How are we having this tourism? So when it comes to ecotourism models in coastal areas, a lot of the tourism, for example, that's run by the forest department is automatically labeled ecotourism. But the community component, if you take the ladder of participation in a very theoretical term, is actually not that very high. It is quite good in some places, but it's generally not that very high. You really have to look at each place and examine it thoroughly to see whether it's a label or it really is following some of the principles that is at the heart of ecotourism.
Yeah, and just want to add to that, that I think, Vinita, maybe you can speak to your experience with Chilika as well, because like Chilika is one of these places that has been labeled ecotourism. But what we've seen from our experience there has been that the way it's been managed is that there's very little sort of planning that has gone into it. There's very little thought that has gone into how do you manage tourism in such a sensitive place like Chilika, where there's already, it's ecologically a really fragile place. You were talking about having Irrawaddy dolphins, which are, so rare and all of that. There's so much conflict within the community because of a lot of previous developments that have happened. So when you bring in something like tourism, again, like Naina says, there's this assumption that tourism isn't, it's not an extractive industry. It's not thought of as an extractive industry. So the amount of care that seems to go into bringing in tourism to a new place is not the same standard as, say, you would see in industries that are thought of as more exploitative and extractive. But it can have a lot of the same impacts because we've seen how it has sort of increased conflict between communities. There's been a lot of marginalization of certain groups within and Dalits within the community. There's been so much impact on the ecology. There have been like dolphins that are getting injured because of the boats. So I think labeling something ecotourism has become very easy, as like the minute anything is in, like a natural place, it just becomes labeled ecotourism. But like questioning what that really means and how much care goes into community involvement and goes into ecological protection. I think that's a difficult, it's a difficult thing to achieve. And
to give a perspective to the background to the audience on Chilika. Chilika is, as most of you must be knowing, is a biodiversity hotspot in Odisha. And Chilika used to be managed by traditional fisher communities. There used to be regulation on the types of fishing gear you can use, nets you can use, boats you can use, fishing grounds where you can catch, the seasons. So there was a sustainable and sort of equitable division. And later, with the boom in the global aquaculture industry. So spare a minute when you are eating prawn, because prawn as a shrimp aquaculture can have a lot of ecological, if not done properly, can have a lot of ecological as well as social side negative impacts. The question is that who gets to impact in something like aquaculture that is capital intensive? Traditional fishers could not afford, and the government started leasing out the common area, the common that the fishers, traditional fishers, historically, customarily fished, to outsiders for culture fisheries. So this led to creation of a lot of inequality, and a lot of fishers who used to initially were self-sustained, who used to fish in the areas next to where they live, later became laborers in other people's shrimp farms, mostly outsiders, mostly upper caste, non-fishers and everything. So it is, as Stella rightly pointed, it is to this dynamic of existing inequality that we are adding in one more component like tourism. And due to a lot of activities that are associated with aquaculture, that is waste disposal and unscientific waste disposal and all of that, and jerry construction and all of that, already the ecosystem in Chilika is under threat. So how do you actually, you can of course label it as ecotourism, but how do you ensure that it is contributing to ecosystem conservation and the development of local communities? And who, when you say local community, who gets benefit, right? Are they the outsiders, or are we actually adding to the further marginalization of the fisher community? All these are questions that we had to look into. So that, and it's very
I just had one thing when you say the word commons. So the thing about tourism that we always say is especially with nature tourism, it's not creating the products it's selling. It's not creating the sunsets. It's not creating the beaches. It's not, but it's selling all these products, and these are all commons. So I think, like Stella said, a lot of extra care. And whose access are you cutting off because you're bringing in something, or whose access are you, whose commons are you actually contributing to? Whose commons conservation are you contributing to through tourism? I think that's a very important question.
Yeah, I can't agree more on this, because I'm reminded of another instance that recently Golden Beach in Puri, Odisha, they got Blue Flag certification. And it was portrayed in mainstream media as a very major, significant, something to be proud of achievement. And the fishing, the allies of state unions under National Fish Workers Forum, they were reporting how fishing community in some, because there were lots of sites under construction, only some of them got the Blue Flag certification. And yes, in some states like Goa and all, for some beach, they had to, stop the process because the local fishers objected. So, how do you, as a researcher, make sense of this? On one side, it is labeled as the same thing we have been talking about, environmental friendly, clean beaches. What are your thoughts on this?
So, Blue Flag is a pet subject of mine, honestly, because it has all the optics, right? Like of ecotourism. It has so if you look at the kind of guidelines, it's all about accessibility for people with disabilities. It's about safety and, environment education. And there's so much stress on environment education. So you look at all of the optics and you're like, this sounds like a great idea. We have tourist beaches that we know are not often taken care of, and we see that there's like waste lying around quite often in a lot of the beaches and things like that. So you're like, okay, this sounds like a great idea. We've gotten Blue Flag, we've made these amazing beaches. But then you look at the details of the implementation in India, and then you see that in every single one of the 8 beaches in India that have gotten the Blue Flag so far, you look at the tenders and they have exactly like 5 things, which is building a promenade. So you cut through, like you go and pour cement on beach sand, because apparently tourists don't want sand, they want promenades. You put toilets, you put drinking water, you put artificial lighting, and you put CCTVs. I'm not saying that all of them are bad. I'm personally very against promenades, but I mean, yeah, I do think having more public toilets and having drinking water available more freely is not necessarily a bad thing. But then again, like where are you doing these? In Puri, like you were saying, fish workers who've been using these spaces for so many years, for generations, they are getting thrown out and access is being given to tourists. In a lot of places in Kapad in Kerala as well, in near Kozhikode, which is like the small beach, which was used by tourists sort of occasionally. But now they've put barriers and they've put an entry fees to it, and you can only sort of use the beach if you're a tourist. If you're not just if you're a tourist, if you're a tourist capable of paying a certain amount of money to enter the beach, because you're paying 20 rupees an hour, 30 rupees an hour, you're removing, say, in Puri, the street vendors who are on the beach are being removed. So it's not just about like tourists, but it's also a question of which tourists are really like, who is this really for in that way?
Exactly. And also you were talking about removal of the fish vendors. I think one point we had to make here is that a lot of these, not vendors, were initially, even those selling snacks and other things were initially from fishing community. Due to the livelihood crisis in fishing community, they became thrown out of their traditional occupation. Then they took up street vending in the beach, and now they are being thrown out of there also. And if you look at Kapad, it's pakka. You are privatizing commons. You are not even making a public property out of it. You are just privatizing. And also one announcement before I forget. To the audience, if you have any questions, please put it under the Facebook Live, and our team will be moderating and they will be bringing the questions to us. You were able to say something, Naina.
Yeah, I just wanted to also like point out the timing when the beaches, when the blue flag certification came. We were, we're just coming out of a lockdown in October, right? That's when the 8 beaches were announced, and I think tourism was probably the sector that got hit even before the lockdown. So a lot of businesses went out during the lockdown, but because tourists had stopped traveling, so in Hampi, a lot of foreign tourists who come there during this season, in the February, March season, had stopped traveling just before, because everywhere else Corona was hitting. We were cutting off our travels, our international travels for events outside, etc. So you could see that in Khajuraho, tourists had stopped coming just a little before. In many places, the local governments actually had put in place restrictions to not get tourists in. Similarly, for like across India, across coastal areas also this was happening. And through the lockdown, a lot of these small businesses and street vendors, guides, etc., no tourism is equal to no income. And this was already the phase, and it was at a point when the industry had broken its back, but also we were thinking of now how do we restructure it in a way that is actually inclusive, that is actually equitable. This becomes an opportunity. Can we rethink tourism? And then we heard the announcement of Blue Flag, which is just the same story all over again. So yeah. It's not really helped. It's helped communities that have already really borne huge losses. And Puri again was also 2019 Fani hit, and many fish workers were severely affected along the Puri coast as well. So I mean, you're having Fani, then you're having the pandemic, then you're having some these kind of project developments that are displacing them. So where do people really go now? That is a very big question.
So could you elaborate a bit on the impact that COVID-19 pandemic has on the coastal tourism sector? Do you think the state and central government, are they doing anything to support these small scale vendors and small scale tour people, who are employed at various small scale jobs in the tourism sector?
So if you look at the tourism sector on the whole, we're estimating about 75 million jobs will be lost. I mean, that was the estimates at the beginning of the pandemic. And I think we're more or less hitting those numbers globally. The same with India. And I don't have statistics specifically of coastal tourism. I can tell you the picture will not be much different as in other places. There are a whole lot of uncounted workers, unaccounted for. Yeah. So there will be many who are within the supply chain, like the smaller business owners, the street vendors, the guides who are not registered guides. A lot of these people are dependent on tourism, but are not necessarily, in the books of like the numbers that are counted, the surveys that are made, etc. So huge impacts we saw. And for example, in one village in where Dakshin works a lot in Andamans, and we did a small survey in the five villages actually in Middle Andaman, that's occupied by that's occupied by the Karen community. And because the Andaman tourism came to a complete standstill, about 80 families were affected because of job loss. And these are small villages, about 1,000, 1,500, 2,000 population. So in terms of just numbers, it's not huge, but for the people living there, it's a huge impact. Similarly, we already spoke about Puri, where a lot of the street vendors it's a temple town. So it's not just tourism along the beach. It's also religious tourism that just stopped suddenly. And if you've been to Puri, you'll know the temple street is full of vendors. And all of them suddenly had nothing, no income coming in. So it was a huge blow to them. In terms of support to the tourism sector itself, there's not been much coming forth. What you had instead was schemes like the Atmanirbhar, which when vendors were able to access them with some, if in places where they were organized and had some information coming to them, and they had some support in accessing these schemes, they were able to access some little bit. But we've also seen in some places that they've really become dependent on hand loans just to run the household for a few months. And that started off a debt cycle for a lot of these people who are in the smaller businesses and tourism service providers who don't have the capital backup, to absorb these kind of sudden impacts. That's what we've seen.
That's devastating. So, because you mentioned religious tourism, and also we were earlier discussing Blue Flag certification, I got thinking of, the blue economy. To give a perspective to the audience,
one of the big things with blue economy was that there was so much of talk about it being about sustainability and poverty alleviation. So you really, when you read the documents, when you look at the optics of it, it's all sort of very picturesque, very beautiful, this ideal situation of, it's going to be economic growth, and there's going to be jobs, and there's going to be environmental protection and all of that. And tourism, again, is really sold as that thing that's going to ensure that there's environmental conservation. So you hear a lot of these international organizations, conservation organizations, saying, ocean health is equal to ocean wealth. And they talk about these $1 million reefs where, tourists are going to come and they're just going to come to, watch these pristine coral reefs. And so, protecting coral reefs is going to be beneficial. And that's how you're going to have conservation happening. And again, when you look at it, when you look at the details of it, again, that entire story is down, because what you're seeing instead is that it's sort of like the tourism industry coming into commons, into these public spaces, almost as if they're empty. You know, it's sort of as if coastal spaces are just empty pieces of land that are just there to be used as, used for construction, used for resorts, whatever it is. And with and I mean, with the blue economy projects as well, if you look at Swadesh Darshan, for example, that you talked about, or there's a component in Sagarmala as well. There's two aspects of it, I think. One is in terms of jobs, there's a lot of emphasis creates jobs, but what it doesn't recognize is that it's creating labor out of people who are otherwise self-employed. You're taking unemployed people and giving them jobs. You're taking people who have traditional livelihoods, who've been fishing for generations, have had their own boats, like you were saying, and like you were talking about earlier as well, about how they became labor in the shrimp farms. That's sort of exactly what happens with the tourism industry as well, where they go from being fish with their own lives and livelihoods to being, in the tourism industry, being, a cook or cleaner or whatever. And often the jobs are also very low paying. You're not going to see a fish worker having a job as, a manager of a big resort. That's not the kind of jobs. The other thing is, again, like with the kind of development that happens. So if you look at Swadesh Darshan, for example, one of the projects that's happening in Swadesh Darshan is in Kanyakumari. They've built a road. If anybody's been recently, you'll have seen it's a very beautiful road, okay, from a very urban perspective. It runs right across the coast, and like it goes from Triveni Sangam, which is where everybody goes, and goes to Sunset Point, and so you're like driving into the sunset, and it all sounds really beautiful. Except that the road has been built cutting through like a dune, which was entirely just full of morning glory vegetation across. And that entire stretch has just been cut. And now, because there's a road, now there are also resorts along the whole way. So where once you stood at Triveni Sangam and you looked to your right and all you could see are rocks and, sand and vegetation, now you look to your right and all you see is sort of concrete. Like you just see all sorts of resorts and toilet complexes, roads and things like that. So there's been no thought as to where are you doing this development? Why are you doing this development? For who are you doing this development? Those are really questions that should have been asked with the blue economy, but have very clearly not been asked at all.
I think it's not possible to look at any of these developments in isolation. So like you said, there is in an earlier comment, you talked about the fishing crisis. There's a very real crisis, and there's a very, for example, in Kanyakumari, there's a very real vulnerability of the coast. There's coastal erosion is a huge problem, and pollution has been a problem that people have talked about in Kanyakumari for so many decades now, and tried to have some government do something about it. It's just not been addressed, and it's all of this has affected people's livelihood that's dependent on the environmental resource or on their immediate environment. So it's not that it doesn't create jobs, but you can't. How can you also ensure that all of these vulnerabilities are also kept in mind? And then what can you create with respect to tourism? Instead, what we have now is several industries coming in, several ports coming in, and then tourism is one component where you say, we'll build a port, we may take the land, but it's okay, we'll get you tourism and you'll get jobs. But it doesn't work like that. And you have to look at I'm glad we are working together for that. And many of us are working together to look at all of this in as a holistic manner, and not just tourism in isolation, not just port building in isolation. And you look at how these are all interlinked, and the kind of development patterns we're following and trying to push. So I think that's a very important.
Exactly the aspect. Blue economy paradigm. You have Sagarmala, you have port expansion, then you have the coastal industrial zone, which gets exemption under environmental impact assessment and all of that. And as we discussed earlier, this who's tourism is it, right? Because it is clearly not from the local community or from the ecosystems, and it's purely urban. That's the word you used. Purely catering to the taste of an urban rich tourist. Because we had two comments and I was going through them, and one person had rightly pointed out that beach is also a playground for children and social space for women, denying access to, I mean, like locals who can't afford as well, right? See that happening in the future for this shift to, privatizing commons and the future of tourism. But like you said, car park, they are charging a fee. What about somebody who can't afford that fee? As a local, he has a right. It should be something that should be kept in the common. Yeah, and the other comment is that apart from fishing, there are other associated activities like making, repairing boats, making nets, drying fish and everything. So essentially, this adds to the larger narrative of invisibilizing the uses of fishing communities of the commons. Because when a non-fisher person, generally an urban person, think of a beach space, they just think of leisure, go have fun with family and friends and all of that. They don't pay attention to what are activities that are going on there, mending boards, repairing nets, drying fishes, social gathering, and everything. Yeah. So you were saying about, yeah.
I think I'll let Stella go first, then I will speak about.
Yeah, I just no, I agree with that completely. That I think one is about affordability, definitely, and seeing the impacts. I like even one of our collaborators in Puri, for example, was talking about how he used to go with his family and his children almost every week to the Golden Beach, because that's where like most of the tourists don't go. So it's more of like a local beach, and that's why he used to go. And he says, I mean, I can't afford to pay, 100 rupees a day to just like go sit on the beach. That's not something I can do. The other thing is also that it's also about a right? It's also about this being a public space. It's a public space for fish workers who use it. It's also a public space for other local communities who use it. We've heard a story about, a person who lives near the Rushikonda beach, who was not allowed to take his dog walking on the beach. And we're going to keep seeing more and more of that, because for those of us who live near beaches, even urban beaches, right? Those of us who live in places like Trivandrum or Thrissur, I mean, where I'm from, beaches are, there are parks in a way, except that they're open and they're free and anybody can come in, and there can be fishing happening in one place, and there can be, kids playing in another place, and there can be couples walking around, and there can be families sort of taking picnics. So that's the kind of open, free space that it is for all of us. And so when you suddenly start putting barriers, whether it's blue economy or you start putting resorts where, where we had open beaches, you start removing street vendors and you put like only these big cafes or whatever it is. It's really also about our right as a citizen to public spaces, and just the shrinking of that. And like, this is really one of the last public spaces that a lot of us have left right now. So watching that being privatized and sort of closed is personally, it's very, very difficult to watch that as someone who's also from the coast, I think.
I wanted to add one thing. Putting fees is one way to cut off access, but it's not the only way. For example, in Digha, which is a very popular destination in West Bengal, many decades people have been going there. It's not a new story. But the level of tourism has definitely increased. And it's also all of these, the promenades and putting in sea walls and then watchtowers, and all of this has happened more recently under a particular project which was funded by the World Bank. But when we speak to the fish workers over there, and when you ask them how do they manage fishing in this beach that's, at 4 a.m. I woke up really early and I just went to the beach, and it's thronging with tourists really early because it's spot. So people come travel in the night, land there on the beach, even brush their teeth on the beach, stay there for the day, and then go off by evening again. So the whole day it's full. And they speak about how they have changed their timings to suit a time when there are not too many people on the beach. But fishing doesn't work like that, right? Like it has to be tuned into the rhythms of nature as well. And you have to look at the tide, you have to look at the season, you have to look at so many things. Like we have pictures of like women trying to pick fish out of the catch was loaded onto the promenade because there's no other place to put it there in Digha, picking out fish out of a whole lot of plastic. Uh, and there's no place for the women to dry their fish. And the women have been severely impacted because not only have they lost traditional livelihoods, which is a combination of this tourism, but also of fish catch itself going down and the number of fishing boats coming down as a result. So it's a lot of things that play, and they also don't find jobs in tourism. This is a very big thing. And for those of you listening out there, how many women have been serving you, they might occupy the space of a behind the desk in big resorts, but in smaller hotels that you go to, which is what Digha is all about. How many people do you see, women out there who are part of the industry and who are getting jobs? That's a very, very big question to ask.
Yeah, it's a really important question to ask. I mean, when you are depriving the livelihood of the local fishing communities and dispossessing of their commons, and are they getting tourism industry? Yeah, you are essentially you are taking a space that is commons to the fishing communities and public to the local communities and privatizing it. So we have a comment related to that. Isn't this a way to grab, and that is what is public and make it private? If you look at the real estate aspects of tourism, and would you like to respond to it?
I say that, yeah, I completely agree. I think it's definitely privatization of public resources. I don't think it's entirely constitutional, but it's happening. And I agree.
Yeah, it would probably be against the public trust.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it's just that, I mean, if you go very, very technical, you don't recognize technically on paper, you don't recognize beaches as commons, right? But they are definitely commons, and that needs to be changed. And definitely within the constitution, I think we have enough and more to say that this is used by so many people, and
it's unfortunate that it's unfortunate that India doesn't have a legislation to recognize the fishers' rights over coastal and marine spaces, similar to that of Forest Right Act, especially community right. Okay, now on that note, what are the recommendations that you would like to make, be it on the policy front or on the legislation front? Because if I remember, draft national tourism policy came out like 2 months pandemic itself, because I remember all of us attending another webinar and discussing it. So, or on the implementation level, are there any recommendations that you would like to make so that, the tourism initiatives do not end up hurting the ecosystem or the local communities?
Stella?
Okay. I think, there's a lot that needs to be done. But I think it needs to start with a few places. One is some basic stuff that policy and legislation has to not be focused on quantity, which is what it is now. You look at any of the tourism policies, it's all about more tourists, more resorts, more boats, more, when I say boats, I mean cruise boats. It's all about everything has to be more. There has to be more of all of it. So I think that needs to be definitely changed. And in terms of implementation, there's a lot of loopholes to things that already exist. So for example, in Rameshwaram, we've seen that there are about, by local estimates, there are about 250 to 300 resorts and lodges that are there in Rameshwaram. The official list that the tourism department has is only 80. But even of those 80, if you look at the pollution control board's list of the resorts that have taken consent to operative that have put in place their pollution measures. There are only 380 registered official hotels that have a system in place for pollution control. So even like basic things like sewage and waste management is really not being done in tourism places. That's one whole aspect of it. And maybe Naina can talk more about community participation and some of the other aspects.
So I actually want to go back to the national tourism policy. It's not a policy that's been finalized or out in the public. It was only being discussed at that time, and it continues to be discussed. And I think the ideology with which it came about, I think, is really important, because it's proposing a lot more of privatization, a lot more governance that are put in the hands of corporates, of special purpose vehicles that will be created to manage a tourism destination, in which companies will have shareholding and etc. It's not, it's spaces are being privatized, but also institutions are being privatized. So all of this is happening together. And as Stella said, in a world where you're asking for very, very capital intensive models of tourism, there's very little that a huge population of India which doesn't have that kind of capital fallback and do to participate. So the community participation is not really being thought about more than being about jobs. I offered 80 jobs created 80 jobs in this community. We took a few acres of land to create this lovely tourism projects that has amusement parks and theaters, and this actually exists a little bit away from where you're working, Vinita, which is a Shamuka Beach tourism project. It's a huge grand proposal, but the kind of jobs it creates is not much, and we've spoken about this enough. So I think what we need is, if you want to move this framework of just job creation to the people over there owning and being responsible for the tourism. So you really have to ask not about, can I make this a tourist destination, but about, this place exists, will people over there benefit from the tourism? Because tourism is a development tool. So what can I do? Is tourism one of the things that they'll benefit from, or is it something else? That's the broader question. And if it is tourism, I think a very important lesson we have learned is that from this pandemic is that being highly mostly relying only on tourism is a very dangerous aspect. And this people have been talking about, I mean, activists of tourism have been talking about forever, and it became a reality in the pandemic, unfortunately, because it's such a vulnerable industry, I guess. Like, tourists may come today because there's something trended on Facebook. They may not come tomorrow because something else trended, or there's some negative story reported of that place. So it's really very dependent on subjective notions of what the tourist perception is and what is promoted, etc. So we have it wiping out other livelihoods and other economies that exist. Instead, what we need is for tourism to come in and add to what already exists without displacing things. So we really need to rethink of tourism in that sense, and perhaps also think of it as what the economies that exist might have left some people, might not have included some people, or there are marginalized communities that exist in every place. So can we have tourism that involves and makes it an inclusive tourism? Can tourism become one way to bring about equality in the society? Can it be one way to bring about sustainability in the society? So I think we need to rethink from that lens, and not from saying, now we want tourism, how do we develop tourism?
Yeah. Well nuanced and thought out answer. Thank you, Naina.
Thank you.
And we have two comments. One person has actually rightly pointed at not only livelihood, but when you are privatizing the commons of fishing community, it also deprives them of their identity. And another person has made a comment that tourism is a mask of development with the different real faces behind. Any comments?
Yes. I think we've already spoken about the blue economy, which is saying port development with tourism components. So you're absolutely right about the different masks. It comes in Sagarmala project. It's coming in as community involvement and skill development. And under it, you have everything described of tourism. So it is, yeah, there are other masks that are hiding tourism, but also tourism itself is wearing many masks of, it's the street, it's clean, and people get jobs, and it's so lovely, and all of that.
Yeah, it's, as the commenter pointed, it's a perfect, phase to grab the more and more of real estate.
Yeah.
Okay, I think we have to nearly reaching the time limit. So last but not the least. So let us say, as somebody who, what are the ways in which I can engage as a tourist so that, my actions or activities are ethical, sustainable, and at least it leads to equitable out the local communities. All the local communities. So are there any clear do's and don'ts?
So again, I think it's a very difficult thing to do given the kind of systemic challenges that exist within the tourism industry. But I think one very important thing, clear do or don't, I think, but more of like sort of an attitude that I think we really need to respect as tourists that we're going into someone else's space. This is just a place that we are visiting. This is someone else's home. So you know how we are on our best behaviors when we go to someone else's house. I think it's important for us that we need to be on our best behavior when we're there. So, for example, we've heard in Rameshwaram, we've heard about how there's been a lot of complaining smell of fish because it's also a fishing area. It's a hub of fishing in Tamil Nadu. And and the complaints have actually had real consequences where, people have been pushed out, like fish workers have been pushed out where they dry their fish or where they, were landing their catch. They've been pushed off onto other beaches because tourists have complained about the smell. But the reality is that that's how coasts smell, like coasts smell of fish. So if you're going to the coast, just don't complain about the smell of fish because, it is food and that is how our food smells. So I think for me, like a lot of absolutely starts with that understanding that this is not your space. This is a space that belongs to somebody else. And having that respect is very, very critical.
Yeah. Thank you, Stella, for reiterating that point, because it is like, to think of it, is the making a complaint that, when you go to a coastal space and making a complaint that it smells of fish is problematic in so many different levels that I don't want to go into that. But I hope the audience is listening, and I will also try to, follow these guidelines to the best of my ability. We have time. Yeah, Naina, you were saying?
If there's 1 more minute, then I would like to add something, which is to talk about how there are a lot of souvenirs we buy. One way to look at souvenirs is to see if they're locally produced, and if maybe sometimes they're even being sold by artists or artist collectives, or as a tourist, it's good to contribute to the economy because it is an industry. It's okay to put your money into the local place and buy the food and benefit the local communities who are part of the tourism as well. So employ guides and employ local guides. The women guides in many places are so a lot of that makes a difference, and have these interactions and ask about how they live and share about yourself as well. You can't be a one-way.
Yeah. And I think just do your research. Like, just don't go into a new place and go to the fanciest resort. Like, I'm not saying never go to resorts, but like do your research. There are so many homestays there's so much amazing local food that's available that like a lot of tourists just don't even try. So it's also, yeah, it's a chance to really learn about another place. So I think do much on a place is really important, because you get to find all these like really hidden gems that that you don't get to see as tourists, and it also helps with the local economy. So yeah, like Naina was saying, I think like going as local as possible absolutely is like the key, I think.
Yeah. And even when you go to a resort, try not to go to a resort that is illegal or built on the land where the either the indigenous communities or the fish workers have been pushed out,
Yeah,
or
yeah.
some
And
resort that
and
have,
actually
you know,
there are resorts
engaged.
that are trying to do good sustainable tourism. So are these places out there also. Not saying no to any one kind of tourism. There are many ways in which you can do sustainable tourism, and yeah, that kind of make the right choice, I think, is important.
Yeah. Just some effort is needed,
Yeah,
so that
yeah.
yeah.
I just want to add one more thing. It's sorry. Can I add one?
We have time.
Because the thing you asked about policies, and now we're
Yeah.
talking about what tourism does, and it's not your home. Also, tourism gives a lot of anonymity to tourists, which allows you to do a lot of things that you wouldn't do at home. And sexual exploitation is one very big component of this. So, I mean, when you talk about guidelines for tourism, I think there are some they're already out there, and we just need to get serious about implementing them. Guidelines for protecting children, protection of women, and ensuring safety from harassment, etc. All of these are really important in any tourist place as well, and in any well. You're a homestay owner, you're a hotel owner, you're a resort owner. Look at these things and see how you can make your place safe for both the tourist children and your own community's children, and the living, both ways. Yeah. So
Yeah, that's a point. Yeah, important point. Yeah. We have one question. What's the effect of tourism on how locals perceive and conserve their commons? Does it increase the disconnect with one's environment?
Um, okay. So I mean, I think it's a difficult question to answer, but I have one just sort of small story that has really hit me, I think, when we were doing our fieldwork again in Rameshwaram, where this one woman who was sort of, she was running this small tea shop near the temple. And it's not an area where like the main tourists go. It's usually, where the drivers go, because, there's also that kind of a class divide that happens in tourist places as well. He was talking about how the area where they were in, it's about like this 1 kilometer long stretch that used to be entirely just a fishing beach, because it's about 200-300 meters away from the main temple, and temple tourists mostly sort of stick to the area that's in and around the temple. And that whole area was a fishing area. And she herself, she was a fisherwoman. She was involved in the drying, but she was also, she used to catch crabs. And she was talking about how at one point there'd be these sort of, adventurous tourists who went that 500 meters extra to the side. And so she would show them how to catch crabs and how she caught crabs. And she would tell them about the different species of crabs that you found there. And, just the sort of thing that she did for fun. And sometimes they would tip her a little bit. And now that entire 1 kilometer stretch has been taken over by tourism. They've built, again, a promenade, and they've built a sort of jetty for boating. They've built a water sports center. There's a bunch of resorts that have come there. And all the fish workers have been moved out of that space. This woman, she's sort of like, that's what she's moved from. She doesn't get any crabs anymore. So now she's moved from sort of doing that to running a tea shop. And she talked, and just that, like, she just watching that space sort of now, which is, there's only about 100 meters what is actually sand there. You don't get any crabs there anymore. She herself has to travel. Now she's been pushed out of there. She's been moved further inland. So she has to take a bus and travel about 6-7 kilometers to even like get to the coast. So I think, I don't know about perception, but I think there's definitely a pushing people out of natural environments, and that's going to change how you relate to your natural environment if you're not interacting with it on a daily basis. So I think, yeah, that's I think my assessment of that.
Anna, anything you would?
It's not, yeah, like Stella rightly said, it's not an easy question to just say yes or no. There are also tourism, community tourisms. For example, in Himachal, I have two examples actually of where the village has set up tourism, and they're very particular about conserving their in these places. There are something called the one panchayat. So the one panchayat, which is the panchayat just for the forest, the village forest that they conserve and they take care of. They're very particular about how the norms and rules for the tourists that go in. Similarly, for another place where they take them trekking into the mountains. And we've heard some similar accounts of in some places, the turtle viewing tourism, where there are very clear norms that communities have set about what tourist behavior should be and can be, and whether they will entertain tourists in some months, because they also understand their ecology very intimately. So they understand what works best. So in some months, they don't take tourists as well. And it really depends on how you engineer this tourism model. So it's not so easy to say all tourism is bad or all tourism is good and everything is conservation. It's not such an easy answer.
Yeah. I was also thinking that it can also lead it to, commodifying one's own culture, right?
Yes,
and
absolutely.
I mean, it can lead a shift into commodifying the commons also. But then again, as you say, everything depends on how the model is implemented and how the model is designed. Okay, I'm reminded at this time for us to wrap.
Right.
Yeah. So, yeah, it has been an amazing conversation. It has been great having you here, guys, here with us. Thank you so much for joining.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us, Vinita, and being a great host. Really nice.
Thank you, guys.